All right, we are now live in our YouTube channel, so we can start anytime.
Okay.
Thank you, Sir Arnel. Thank you. Okay, ma'am, I'll start the clock.
Okay, please.
Good evening from Mexico City. Good morning and good afternoon to our participants from all over the world, and welcome to a very special webinar in celebration of the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, also known as MANAMo 2024. To our first-time attendees, and for everyone's information, Proclamation number 316 of 2017 declares the month of September as the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, which aims to increase awareness and appreciation for the Philippines' maritime and archipelagic nature. Before we begin, I'd like to lay out some gentle house rules and reminders. We would like to kindly request that video cameras and microphones of all participants in Zoom be disabled throughout the program and presentation. After our speaker's presentation, we will have an open forum wherein everyone is encouraged to ask questions or provide their comments. Participants may also state or write their questions in the Q&A chat box. Participants are also invited to fill out an evaluation form, which will be posted in the chat box at the end of our webinar. A gentle reminder that the evaluation form will be the basis for the issuance of certificates of participation. It will also help guide the embassy in our future events. With that said, I'd like to call on Her Excellency Lilibeth R. Diapera, Ambassador of the Philippines in Mexico, to deliver her welcome remarks. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you, NJ. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. To all our participants from various offices and universities in the Philippines and Mexico, members of the Diplomatic Corps, colleagues from the other Philippine Foreign Service posts, members of the Filipino communities under our jurisdiction, those who are joining us via our YouTube channel, friends, and my colleagues at the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, good evening, good morning. Ulit-ulit, ah. Pursuant to Proclamation number 316, signed by President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, declaring the month of September as the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, with this year's national theme, Pamana ng Karagatan para sa kinabukasan ating ingatan, and in line with the Department of Foreign Affairs Strategic Plan for 2023-2028, enforcing Objective 1.4 to promote awareness of the Philippines' maritime status and garner support for a rules-based international maritime regime, the Philippine Embassy in Mexico wishes to welcome you all to this special webinar entitled The Archipelagic Concept in the South China Sea Dispute. Today, we have the privilege to listen to the lecture of our esteemed retired Senior Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the Philippines, Honorable Justice Antonio T. Carpio, who has lectured extensively on the West Philippine Sea issue in various local and international fora. On behalf of the Embassy of the Philippines in Mexico, allow me to express my sincerest gratitude to you, Justice Carpio, for accepting our invitation to be our resource speaker for this year's MANAMO webinar. We always hear and watch the news regarding many issues on the West Philippine Sea and of our Filipino fisher folk fighting for their rights to fish at the Scarborough Shoal, but most of us are not so aware of many issues regarding their concerns. Today, we get the opportunity to understand more of these issues and concerns. I invite everyone to listen attentively and also to post questions later on after the presentation. Let us all listen and learn. Thank you for your participation. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'd like to call on now Ms. Jong Inid for the acknowledgement of participants in today's webinar. Ms. Jong? I'm sorry, Ms. Jong, you're on mute. Kindly unmute yourself. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, NJ. Good evening in Mexico and good morning in the Philippines. On behalf of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to everyone who joined us today for a meaningful webinar in celebration of Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, or MANAMO. Our deep gratitude is warmly extended to the following: Philippine Embassy in Santiago, Ambassador Celeste Vinson Balatbat, Third Secretary and Vice Consul Ramona R. Jose Bolicer, Philippine Embassy in Hanoi, First Secretary and Consul Shirley Ong Nuevo, Second Secretary and Consul Jose Santiago Ponasher Olaguera, Sir Secretary and Vice Consul Rosa Maria Isabel Marcos Pareja, and Ms. Rebecca Sagada Agado Pentanilla. From the Philippine Consulate General in Hong Kong, Vice Consul George Mariano Arugay Soriano, Vice Consul David BNP Pahe, and Ms. Leia Manalad Mejia. From the Philippine Embassy in Singapore, Ms. Renee Gail Miralles Chua, Ms. Ivana Carla Cortez Vicencio Luz. Philippine Embassy in Rabat, First Secretary and Consul Rapunzel Aglipay Acop, Philippine Embassy in Berlin, Vice Consul Dana Michelle C. Del Rosario, Philippine Embassy in Rome, Consul General Randy Bagaypo Arquiza, Philippine Embassy in Brunei, Ms. Bernadette Averilla Mendoza, Philippine Embassy in Riyadh, Ms. Carla Jane Yu Rabacal, Philippine Embassy in Beijing, Ms. Anna Michael Navarro Caponpon, Philippine Mission to the United Nations USA, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative Leila C. Laura Santos, Embajada de la República de Iraq, Encargada de Negocios, Doctora Mariam Al-Sheikh, Representación del Gobierno de Colima en la Ciudad de México, Encargada del Despacho de Seth Vázquez Sánchez, Inayarit, Licenciada en Derecho Marina, Igot da Costa, Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia o INA, Ciudad de México, Arqueologist Roberto Junco, Directora de Operación Lorena Figueroa Reza, Ciudad de México, Gobierno del Estado de Tamaulipas, Jefa de Análisis y Seguimiento de Proyectos Iris Pancholi, Embajada de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela en México, Ministro Consejero Aldo Vicencio Perfecto Alessandro, Ministro Consejero Aldo Vicencio, Embajada de Malaysia en México, Embajador Extraordinario y Plenipotenciario, Embajador Jamal Sharifuddin Johan, German Embassy, Cultura Attaché Philip Gox, Director Irma Dogal B. Pointelin, Museo de la Cultura del Seguro.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jong. Looks like we have a full house. To introduce our very special resource speaker, I'd like to invite Mr. Ralph Roldan, First Secretary and Consul of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico. Sir Ralph, the floor is yours.
It's my honor to introduce our distinguished speaker for today. Born in Davao City, Philippines, Justice Antonio T. Carpio was sworn in as member of the Supreme Court on October 26, 2001. Justice Carpio obtained his law degree from the College of Law of the University of the Philippines, where he graduated valedictorian and cum laude in 1975. He placed sixth in the 1975 bar examinations. He earned his undergraduate degree in economics from the Ateneo de Manila University in 1970. In his student days, Justice Carpio was chairman of the editorial board of the Philippine Law Journal of the UP College of Law. He was editor-in-chief of the Guidon, the school paper of Ateneo de Manila University. He also served as managing editor of the Philippine Collegian, the school paper of the University of the Philippines. Fresh out of law school, Justice Carpio went into private practice and founded the Carpio Villarasa and Cruz law firm. He was professorial lecturer of the UP College of Law from 1983 until 1992, when President Fidel Ramos appointed him Chief Presidential Legal Counsel with cabinet rank. As such, he worked for major reforms in telecommunications, shipping, civil aviation, and insurance industries. Justice Carpio was a member of the Board of Regents of the University of the Philippines from 1993 to 1998. In 2001, at the age of 52, he was one of the youngest appointees as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Shortly after his appointment, he launched for the judiciary the Supreme Court e-library, the first full-text searchable and retrievable online law library in the Philippines and among the first in Asia. He penned many decisions, leaving no backlog in his docket, a feat rarely attained by a Supreme Court magistrate. For his distinguished and exemplary service to the Republic, Justice Carpio was awarded in 1990 the Presidential Medal of Merit by then President Fidel Ramos. In 1991, Justice Carpio received the Outstanding Achievement Award in Law from the Ateneo de Manila Alumni Association. In 2002, he was also the recipient of the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Ateneo de Davao Alumni Association. In 2009, he was conferred the Doctorate of Laws, honoris causa, by the Ateneo de Davao University. In 2015, the UP Alumni Association named him Outstanding UP Alumnus in Public International Law. In 2017, the UP Alumni Association again named him one of the three most outstanding alumni of the association. In 2020, the University of the Philippines conferred on Justice Carpio the Doctor of Laws honoris causa. In 2021, the Ateneo de Manila University also conferred on Justice Carpio the Doctor of Laws honoris causa. Justice Carpio has lectured extensively on West Philippine Sea issue in various local and international fora. In 2015, the Department of Foreign Affairs sponsored Justice Carpio on a world lecture tour on the West Philippine Sea issue. Justice Carpio presented the Philippines' perspective on the issue before think tanks and universities in 30 cities covering 17 countries. Justice Carpio published his research and analysis of the West Philippine Sea issue in an ebook entitled The South China Sea Dispute, Philippine Sovereign Rights and Jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea. Justice Carpio was the chair of the Second Division of the Supreme Court and chair of the Senate Electoral Tribunal. He retired from the Supreme Court on October 26, 2019 upon reaching the compulsory retirement age of 70.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Consul Roldan. Thank you for inviting me to discuss with you the concept of Philippine archipelago in relation to the West Philippine Sea dispute. May I share my slides with you? Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir, we can see your slide, sir.
Okay.
Maybe, sir, it's best if you put it in full screen.
Okay. Okay. There are two concepts of the term Philippine archipelago. The first is that the term Philippine archipelago refers to the territorial sovereignty of the Philippines as delineated in the three international treaties that define Philippine territory. The second concept is that the Philippine archipelago is a group of islands that qualify as an archipelago for purposes of determining maritime zones under the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. These two concepts are distinct from each other, being governed by different laws. Territorial sovereignty is governed by general principles of international law, while maritime zones are governed by UNCLOS. However, there can be no maritime zones without territory, since land dominates the sea, and only naturally formed land territory can generate maritime zones. There are three treaties that define Philippine territory. The 1898 Treaty of Paris ceded the Philippine archipelago to the US. And what was ceded, I quote the Treaty of Paris, the archipelago known as the Philippine Islands, lying within the following line of the Treaty of Paris. The second treaty is the Treaty of Washington, which clarified that the cession of 1898 included any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines of the 1898 Treaty of Paris. And the third is the treaty between the US and the UK, demarcating the boundary line between North Borneo and Southern Philippines. This third treaty defines the Philippine archipelago as a territory acquired by the US in the 1898 Treaty of Treaty of Paris and the 1900 Treaty of Washington. These three treaties speak of the Philippine archipelago. Now, in the Treaty of Paris, it says there that Spain cedes to the U.S. the archipelago known as the Philippine Islands and comprehending the islands lying within the following line. And the U.S. paid $20 million for that. So the Treaty of Paris conveyed to the U.S. only islands within the treaty lines. There were other islands outside the treaty lines belonging to the Philippine archipelago, but they were not conveyed. And when the Americans came here, they realized that. So a second treaty was made. So if you look at the very few people know that the Treaty of Paris of 1898 had a map attached to it. This is the map that was attached to it. And it shows that in the West Philippine Sea, this is the West, the lines of the Treaty of Paris turn sharply to the left to include the entire Spratlys as part of Philippine territory that was ceded, and to include Cagayan de Sulu, Cebuto, and Mapon Islands. So when the Treaty of Paris was signed, of course, it had to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. President sent the treaty for ratification together with this map. And the U.S. Senate ratified the treaty based on this map. So it was clear from the point of view of the Americans that the Spratlys were included in the cession. But there was a problem because the treaty itself contained in its text the geographical coordinates, longitude, latitude, and if you connect this longitude, latitude coordinates in lines, you connect the coordinates, the Treaty of Paris lines do not turn sharply to the left in the West Philippine Sea. It slants alongside Palawan, turns sharply to the right to exclude Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto. So the Spratlys were not part of the conveyance as far as the geographical coordinates were concerned. So there was a variance between the map and the text of the treaty. And of course, the text will prevail. So when the Americans came here, the Spanish garrison in this area, in Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto, refused to vacate. They said, we are not part of the cession. If you look at the treaty lines, we are not part of the cession. So the Americans talked to the Spaniards to clarify, to have a second treaty. And there were correspondences, notes verbal between the U.S. side and the Spanish side. And this was the correspondence from the U.S. Secretary of State to the Spanish ambassador in Washington. The U.S. said, our intention was that Spain would convey all its territorial sovereignty and title in that part of the Western Pacific to the U.S. That was really the intention. But the Americans made a mistake because they were the ones who fixed the coordinates. They were the victors, so they dictated the treaty, and the Spaniards replied. This is the communication of the Spanish ambassador in reply to that note verbal. The Spanish commissioners had no recourse but to sign what was dictated to them. And the text of the treaty clearly delimits the ceded territory by the coordinates, and what has been excluded from the demarcation remains under the sovereignty of Spain. So this this dispute continued. There were several communications, very acrimonious communications. And finally, the Americans said, okay, to clear this matter, we will pay you an additional $50,000 to clarify that all the other islands outside the treaty lines were also conveyed. The Spaniards said, no, that's too little. The Americans doubled the amount to 100,000, and the Spaniards agreed, yes, we will sign the Treaty of Washington of 1900. And there is only one article in the treaty. There is only one article, and it says Spain relinquishes to the U.S. all title and claim of title to any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines, as if they have been expressly included within those lines when the Treaty of Paris of 1898 was signed. So the Treaty of Washington conveyed to the US all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines of the Treaty of Paris. So this is the concept of Philippine archipelago referring to the territory that was ceded. And so what really happened when the Treaty of Washington was signed was the intention of the US to include the Spratlys, to include Cagayan de Sulu and Cebuto and all other islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines should be conveyed. And the Spaniards, Spain agreed to this express intent. So there was a meeting of the minds. In the Treaty of Washington of 1900, both US and Spain agreed what was conveyed. And what was conveyed was all islands of the Philippine archipelago, whether lying within the treaty lines or outside the treaty lines, specifically based on this map, the Spratlys were ceded to the US under the Treaty of Washington. So it cannot be denied. Now, these three treaties of that govern Philippine territory, defining Philippine territory, are very important because of the international principle of uti possidetis juris. In English, it means roughly, as you possess under the law, stay there. If you look at the map of Africa and Latin America, you will see that the boundaries, the horizontal and vertical boundaries are drawn in straight lines. So one tribe may be living on one side of the boundary and the members of the same tribe may be on the other side of the boundary. And when these countries became independent, there was a fear that there will be boundary wars because one state will always try to claim the members of the tribe living on the other side of their boundary. So to prevent boundary wars, perpetual boundary wars, international developed this principle that the boundaries established by the colonial powers for their former colonies, when they became independent, are sacrosanct. They cannot be changed without the consent of the two parties to that boundary. These boundaries are sacrosanct, and this principle of law applies to all areas where the decolonization process took place in Africa, South America, and in Asia and elsewhere where the colonial powers granted independence to their former colonies. So this is a principle meant to preserve peace and stability, because the purpose of international law is, of course, to preserve peace and stability in all regions of the world. And unless you have this principle, there will be perpetual boundary wars. And this is a general principle of law that governs all countries, whether they're parties to the treaty or not. So, in several cases, the international courts said that this is a principle of general kind, which is logically connected with the decolonization process wherever it occurs. Thus, the three treaties establishing Philippine territory, the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the 1900 Treaty of Washington, and the 1930 Treaty with the British, all entered into by the colonial powers, should be respected under the uti possidetis juris principle as the territory of the Philippines when the Philippines achieved independence on July 4, 1946. A very, very strong principle of international law. So the question arises, what are the islands of the Philippine archipelago constituting Philippine territory covered by the uti possidetis juris principle? Where do we look for that map or that document which says that these are the islands of the Philippine archipelago? Remember, we are talking of territory here, not maritime zones. At this time, there was no UN Convention on the Law of the Sea first. So we are basing it on the treaties, the three treaties. Well, we start, of course, with the, aside from the 1898 map that was attached to the Treaty of Paris, we have to go back to 1734. This is the 1734 Pedro Murillo Velarde map. And it shows Panacot as part of Philippine territory. That's Scarborough Shoal. And Los Baos de Paragua. Paragua is the old name of Palawan, Spanish name. Los Baos means the shoals. The shoals of Palawan, those are the Spratlys. And of course, you have the cartouche on the upper right hand. That is the crown of Spain, the symbol of the crown of Spain. If you see that, then the map is an official map of the crown of Spain. So when this map was made, it was a claim by the Philippines under Spain to Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. And at that time, there were no other claimants. It was only, the only claimant was Spain. Spain was the first to claim it. No other country claimed it. In 1808, Spain again issued another map, an updated map of the Philippines. They now have the Dirección Hidrografía, that's the charting office of Spain at the time, equivalent to our NAMRIA. And you will see here Los Baos, you will see here Scarborough Shoal with the depth soundings. Very unique because only Scarborough Shoal has depth soundings in all the islands of the Philippine archipelago. Why? Because in 1792, Alessandro Malaspina, who headed the Spanish scientific expedition, came to Manila. And because Scarborough Shoal was famous, because in 1748, the British clipper ship Scarborough ran aground and European cartographers renamed the shoal Scarborough Shoal. So Malaspina went there to Scarborough Shoal and conducted the first ever hydrographic survey. Hydrographic survey was made by measuring the depth of the waters with a plummet, lead attached to a thin wire, so you measure the depth. This is very unique because in the rest of the islands of the Philippine archipelago, there are no depth soundings. Only Scarborough Shoal has depth soundings. So this is an official map of Philippine territory as of 1808. Then we come to I call this the Holy Grail map. This is the 1875 Carta General del Archipelago Filipino made by Dirección Hidrografía, the charting agency of Spain at the time. And this is the most complete and most detailed map of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. And you will see here Scarborough Shoal with depth soundings, Scarborough Shoal or Bajo de Masinloc. And you have here the Spratlys. all the islands of the Spratlys are here with depth soundings. So the Spaniards went to each island and measured the depth to guide navigators. So you will see here Tito Island, that's Pag-asa. You will see here Loita, that's Kota, all the islands. And when the Americans came here, after signing the Treaty of Paris, they did not have a map of the Philippines, so they adopted this map, the entire map, complete. The US adopted this and issued this in 4 editions. This is the 1901 edition, and you will see here the same. Carta General del Archipelago Filipino, Dirección Hydrografía, but the US added the telegraph lines, the military cable lines, Eastern cable lines, and the War Department. You will see here, they just superimpose, but it's exactly the same map. And the Americans adopted and reissued this map in 4 editions from 1898 to 1902. This is really the complete map of the Philippine archipelago. Unfortunately, we don't have a copy of this map in any of our public libraries or museums. And I've asked around from our private collectors, they do not have also a copy of this map. So where did I get this map? I downloaded it from the Ministry of Defense of Spain. You can download for free a high resolution copy. And the US Embassy, I talked to them to donate at least one. And they did donate, but it's not the original. They just put there. They donated to the Department of Foreign Affairs a copy of the 1875 map that they issued, and they put a certification. This is a certified true copy of the original, because the Americans had this adapted and reissued 4 times. So now this map figured in the famous international law case, Island of Palmas. The island of Palmas is an island of the east coast of Mindanao. It was discovered by the Spaniards, and you can see this island, this Islas Palmas Island, in the 1875 Carta General. It's there, part of Philippine territory. So the Spaniards discovered it, but never returned to the island. It was the Dutch that went there and signed a treaty with the locals. There were about 700 inhabitants. The Datu signed it, and the Datu and his followers, his people, pledged allegiance to the Netherlands and flew the Dutch flag. So one day, American Governor General Leonard Wood went to Mindanao, and he saw this island, and there he saw the Dutch flag flying. So he said, how come that's the Dutch flag when that's part of Philippine territory? And so that dispute was submitted to arbitration by Max Huber. And in that arbitration, this is a famous case in international law, the U.S. submitted a memorandum, and in that memorandum, the U.S. attached the 1875 map. And the U.S. said, this exhibit, the map, is both an American official and a Spanish official map. So there you are, the Americans, the U.S. officially said this is an official map of Philippine territory during the American regime and, of course, during the Spanish regime, because the cartouche of the map says that. Unfortunately, we lost that case because Max Huber said discovery is just an inchoate title. To complete an inchoate title, you must exercise peaceful and continuous display of sovereignty. Continuous and peaceful display of sovereignty was exercised by the Netherlands. So today, Islas Palmas is part of Indonesia. There is Islas Palmas is here. So you will see very near Sarangani. But this established that the 1875 Carta General del Archipelago Filipino is an official map of Philippine territory during the American regime and the Spanish regime, and therefore all the other islands there are part of Philippine territory. In 1938, the Philippines was run now by the Commonwealth, by Filipinos, and the Filipinos at the time really had a good foresight because they said some country might claim Scarborough Shoal. Remember, Scarborough Shoal is outside the treaty lines of the Treaty of Paris, and they said we have to, if that is part of Philippine territory, we have to put up a lighthouse there as a marker to announce to other countries that it's part of Philippine territory. So they had to write a letter to an inquiry to Colonel Hull, the Secretary of State at the time, to ask if Scarborough Shoal is part of Philippine territory. And the reply was this: because there are no other claimants, the shoal should be regarded as one of the islands ceded to the U.S. by Spain in the 1900 Treaty of Washington. So there you are, an official acknowledgement by the U.S., by their foreign minister. The Secretary of State is a foreign minister, and that's binding on the U.S. And at that time, in 1938, no other country has claimed Scarborough Shoal. So this is the first application of the Treaty of Paris, that islands outside the treaty lines but belonging to the Philippine archipelago were also ceded by Spain to the U.S. Now, in the arbitration at The Hague, that China said we are not participating, but this is our position paper. So China actually submitted a position paper, and the tribunal said we will treat your position paper as your comment or answer. And in that position paper, China said, Philippine territory is governed by 3 treaties. They quoted the 1935 Constitution, the article on the national territory. They quoted it, that Philippines comprises all the territories ceded to the U.S. by the Treaty of Paris in 1898, together with all the islands embraced in the Treaty of Washington, and the treaty concluded between the U.S. and U.K. In 1930, demarcating the boundary between southern Philippines and British North Borneo. So they said, they admitted, this is a judicial admission. The highest form of admission is a judicial admission that Philippine territory is governed by the Treaty of Washington also, with all the islands embraced in the Treaty of Washington. But the Chinese did not read the text of the Treaty of Washington, did not review, did not examine the history, why the Treaty of Washington was concluded. They just look at the internet and they saw this treaty lines and they said, oh, the Scarborough Shoal is outside the line, the Spratlys are outside the line, so the Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys do not form part of Philippine territory. In fact, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in a speech at the Washington, D.C. at the CSIS, it's the leading think tank in Washington, before diplomats from all over the world. This is February of 2016, before the Arbitral Award was promulgated. He said that Philippine territory is governed by the 3 treaties, and everything within the treaty lines belong to the Philippines, and everything outside the treaty lines do not belong to the Philippines. Because this is what, if you go to the internet, this is what you see. But nobody, but even Filipinos, even our legal luminaries, have fallen for this misconception. I call this the greatest misconception in Philippine history, that Philippine territory is limited only to the islands within the treaty lines. Even Solicitor General Mendoza, he wrote an article in the PhilJA journal. That's the official journal of the Philippine Judicial Academy under the Supreme Court. In his article, he said, Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. That's also Father Bernas in a column in Inquirer in 2009. He said, in 2012, rather, he said, Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. And if you go to the internet, you will see former Senate President Enrile, who is now the Chief Presidential Legal Counsel of President Marcos Jr., saying that Scarborough Shoal is outside the treaty lines. Scarborough Shoal do not belong to the Philippines. This is the greatest misconception in Philippine history, and this has misled China to be courageous in claiming Scarborough Shoal and Spratlys and showing this map to the world that, see, Philippine territory is limited to the islands within the treaty lines. So we have to correct this now. And it's time really to correct this greatest misconception in Philippine history. Of course, China is bound by that judicial admission, and China cannot get out of that. They admit that Philippine territory is governed also by the Treaty of Washington. And so that is the territorial concept of Philippine archipelago. Now we go to the maritime concept of the Philippine archipelago under UNCLOS. But before that, there is another very strong principle of international law. Because under the maritime concept of archipelago under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the term archipelago has a definite, as a prescribed definition. You must comply with certain conditions before you can be an archipelago. You must have a water-to-land ratio between 1:1 and 9:1. Will the 1982 Convention retroact to define Philippine archipelago under these treaties? No, definitely no. Under the doctrine of intertemporal law, the rights under the treaty must be evaluated in the light of the law contemporary with the treaty, not with reference to the law enforced at the time the dispute arose or the time the dispute is decided. So, for purposes of determining Philippine territory under those three treaties defining Philippine archipelago will be defined as that term was understood by the parties to the treaty, by international law at the time. And at that time, there were no maritime zones. There was no UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. So there are now two concepts of Philippine archipelago. For the territorial concept, what is the territory of the Philippine archipelago? We go to the three treaties and we do not apply the definition of archipelago in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was adopted in 1982. So Philippine archipelago as a territory is different from Philippine archipelago as maritime zones. So under the UNCLOS, the term archipelago is defined as a group of islands which are so closely interrelated that they form an intrinsic geographical, economic, and political entity, or which has historically been regarded as such. We could have fallen in this because the Philippine archipelago was historically regarded to include other islands outside the treaty lines, including Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. However, UNCLOS says that this definition is subject to certain requirements stipulated in UNCLOS, like the water-to-land ratio, that it must not depart, the lines must not depart appreciably from the general configuration of the archipelago. So these are the requirements. Under UNCLOS, there are specific requirements for a group to be considered an archipelago. First, An archipelago must be constituted wholly by one or more archipelagos and may include other islands. Second, this is the problem. We cannot use that historically considered. The baseline shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. Scarborough Shoal is about 124 nautical miles from the coast of Luzon. It will depart appreciably from the general configuration of the archipelago, also the Spratlys. And then there is the requirement that the baseline shall not exceed 100 nautical miles, except for 3%, which can exceed up to 125 nautical miles. And the main islands must be within the baselines. And there is the water to land ratio. The water to land ratio must be anywhere between 1:1 and 9:1. And the tribunal that issued the July 12, 2016 award said separately the Spratlys cannot be considered an archipelago because it will not satisfy this water to land area. So under UNCLOS, an archipelago can draw archipelagic baselines, straight baselines joining the outermost points of the outermost islands and reefs of the archipelago, and drying reefs. Drying reefs means low tide reefs. Low tide means at low tide you can see the reef, it's above water. At high tide you cannot see it because it is submerged. So you can connect your base point will be the outermost island or the outermost drying reef. The archipelagic state has sovereignty over the archipelagic waters. The archipelagic waters are the waters landward of the archipelagic baselines. From the archipelagic baselines, you measure 12 nautical miles seaward, and that's your territorial sea. So the archipelagic waters are not territorial sea. They are internal waters, really. We in our constitution, we call them internal waters. The UN Convention calls them archipelagic waters. For non-archipelagic states, they have to measure the baselines, normal baselines, from the low water mark along the coast of their islands. So their territorial sea is measured along the base on the low water mark. The advantage of an archipelagic state is that it will have more waters. So before the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, all these waters were high seas because you measure the 12 nautical mile territorial sea. Beyond that will be the high seas already. So there were high seas inside the Philippine archipelago under the old rule before the 1982 UNCLOS. So if you look at this map, the inner lines, the black lines, constitute our archipelagic baselines. And it is drawn from the outermost island or drying reef. Before, you have to draw the baselines will be along the coast. And you measure 12 nautical miles. Now, the baselines will be the outermost island or drying reef, and you measure 12 nautical miles. So this space between the black line and the first red line, that's the territorial sea. This second line, the second line and the third line, that's the contiguous zone. The contiguous zone is part of the EEZ. We don't have sovereignty over the contiguous zone, but we have certain jurisdictional rights to enforce our customs, immigration, sanitation, and fiscal policies like taxation. So we really gained a lot of internal waters under the archipelagic concept, because There are no more high seas here. They're all archipelagic waters. We have sovereignty over archipelagic waters. We have sovereignty here, but of course that sovereignty is subject to archipelagic sea lines. Other countries can have the right to traverse under archipelagic sea lanes. We have to designate the sea lanes. Otherwise, if we don't designate, the old traditional international routes will apply. So there is a route here from the San Bernardino Strait going out to from Mindoro. But now if we designate the sea lanes, we can designate one sea lane here and another here and maybe another here. But we don't have to, because it's too close. This area is too close. So these are the zones. These are the archipelagic waters within the baseline, within the, and then the next is the contiguous zone. Next is the territorial sea and the contiguous zone. And this is our exclusive economic zone. 200 nautical miles measured from the baseline. But of course, we cannot, it will end here because Taiwan generates its own exclusive economic zone. Borneo will generate its own exclusive zone. So this is drawn as if there are no other islands. There are no other opposing coastal states. And this is our extended continental shelf that we won, that was affirmed by the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. So in the archipelagic waters, it's like our territorial waters. We have complete sovereignty. The only thing that foreigners can do is to exercise innocent passage. Then we have our territorial sea. That's territory in the sea. That's still territory. Then contiguous zone. That's part of the EEZ. In the EEZ, we have sovereign rights to exploit exclusively all natural resources, all the fish, oil, gas, and other mineral resources. So this is our exclusive economic zone. It's called exclusive economic zone because the exploitation of the economic resources in the zone is exclusive to the adjacent coastal state, and we are the adjacent coastal state here. And here, in the extended continental shelf, we have sovereign rights to exploit the non-living resources in the seabed, and also the sedentary species. What are sedentary species? They are living organisms that become immobile when they reach maturity, like giant clams. When they become mature, they cannot move anymore. They just stay there. So we can exploit the oil, gas, and mineral resources. The only living organism we can exploit are the sedentary species. Here, all natural resources, living and non-living, belong to us. Of course, our territorial, our archipelagic waters is part of our territory. So those are the maritime zones. Now, in the Republic Act 9522, we amended our baselines to comply with the UNCLOS because, for example, here in our baseline exceeded 125 nautical miles, and that's against UNCLOS, so we cut it into two. We have here and here. Before, we just made a straight line. And also we optimize our archipelagic waters and territorial sea, because here under the old baseline we connected this one, but so our baseline was used to be here, so our territorial sea was measured from here, and our exclusive economic zone was also measured from here. But we availed of the provision of UNCLOS that 3% of our baselines can be as long as 125 nautical miles. So we made this our baseline. So all of this now are archipelagic waters. Our territorial sea is measured from here, and our EEZ is measured from here. So we gained uh, uh, actually more exclusive economic zone. And we did that in 5 places. We optimized the lines so that we can have more archipelagic waters, and we can push further to the sea our territorial sea, our baselines. And we are now compliant with UNCLOS, but we have also optimized our maritime zones. And here, the Scarborough Shoal is here, the Spratleys. We call this offshore islands. Offshore islands because the UNCLOS says an archipelagic state may include other islands. So that's the meaning. Other islands, because the requirement is that your baselines must not depart appreciably from the general configuration of the archipelago, and it will depart. So we just enclose this as a regime of islands. The baselines will be the normal baselines from the low water mark, and also this. So the Philippines now, maritime-wise, in accordance with UNCLOS, we have 1 archipelago and 2 offshore islands. Scarborough Shoal and the Calayan Island Group, we call them offshore islands. Remember, the definition of an archipelagic state is one that is composed of 1 or more archipelagos and may include other islands. So we have 1 archipelago and 2 other islands, the Calayan Island Group and Scarborough Shoal. So here, before the line, our baseline was here. We made it a straight baseline because it's within $125. So we gained this. And we did that in 5 other places, like here. Now, if you look at Manila, this is Manila Bay. This is our baseline. These are internal waters. Under UNCLOS, these are, under our constitution, we call these internal waters. Under UNCLOS, these are archipelagic waters. But we are allowed to draw closing lines in base. So we can actually draw a closing line here, and this one will become under UNCLOS internal water, and these are archipelagic waters. Internal waters, there's no right of innocent passage. In archipelagic waters, there's a right of innocent passage. So this is our baseline. You count 12 nautical miles, that's our territorial sea, 12 nautical miles, contiguous zone. From here to here, that's 200 nautical miles, that's our exclusive economic zone. And of course, we also have our extended continental shelf here. So these are the waters within the territory of an archipelago. If you look at this map, so you have here, you draw a closing line here because you're allowed, if your bay, the area of your bay is equal to or more than the semicircle that you can draw here based on the length of one side and the other side an island where you can use as a base point. So this qualify as internal waters. So there's no right of innocent passage here. These are archipelagic waters, and these are inland waters. That's the Laguna de Bay. Now, these are the maritime zones under UNCLOS. You have the territorial sea, 12 nautical miles from, if you are a normal state, if you are not an archipelagic state, from the low water mark. If you are an archipelagic state, from the outermost island or drying reef 12 nautical miles. You have your contiguous zone here, but it's really part of the exclusive economic zone. So you have the exclusive economic zone, 188 nautical miles from the edge of the territorial sea, and from the edge of the exclusive economic zone will begin the high seas. The high seas belong to all mankind, and all the fish here belong to mankind. Here, all the fish and mineral resources, non-living mammals, belong to the coastal state. Here, the fish belong to mankind, but the mineral resources and the sedentary species up to 150 nautical miles maximum belong to the coastal state. And here is the area belong to mankind. All the mineral resources here belong to mankind. From here, the fish belong to mankind. And above in the waters,
Hello, sir.
there's freedom of navigation from the edge of the territorial
Hello,
seas
sir.
up to
Apologies,
the
po,
high.
sir. Apologies, sir. This is a gentle reminder, sir, that you have 5 minutes remaining po.
Yeah,
Thank you,
okay.
sir.
Yes. And there is also freedom of overflight for civilian and military vessels, freedom of navigation for military and civilian vessels. So those are the maritime zones under UNCLOS. And of course, I've discussed this, that we have under Republic Act 9522, we declared Scarborough Shoal and the Spratleys as offshore islands because the UNCLOS says an archipelagic state must be constituted by one or more islands and may include other islands. And so Bao de Masinloc and Scarborough Shoal are offshore islands. They are offshore islands. And that ends my presentation. Thank you for your patience and kind attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very informative presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to open the floor for questions or comments. Kindly use the raise hand feature of Zoom, or you may type in your questions or comments in the chat box. Do we have any questions from our participants online? While we wait, sir, we did receive several questions for you to answer. One of them, of course, is in your own opinion, sir, what do you think is the current, what do you think of the current situation in the West Philippine Sea? Thank you, sir.
Well, we can see that China is doubling down on its 10-dash line claim. Whatever is inside the 10-dash line, China claims as their national territory, and they're doubling down. They're very aggressive now in enforcing their national territory within the 10-dash line. And we see that they are now ramming our ships, even if it's in the EEZ. They do not recognize our EEZ. So our response should be to bring again China to another arbitration because China damaged our Coast Guard vessels. That's one. Second, we should invite all other coastal states, especially our allies, the US and other like-minded states, to sail as often as they can in the West Philippine Sea. Why? Because when they sail in the West Philippine Sea within the 10-dash line, they are telling China, these are not your waters. This is not your territory under the Arbitral Award of 2016. This is part of the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, and there are UNCLOS. In the exclusive economic zone, there's freedom of navigation in our flight, and that's why we can conduct our naval drills here. So they're actually enforcing the Arbitral Award. And our game plan should be to invite more countries to conduct freedom of navigation in our flight, because the more they conduct freedom of navigation in our flight, the more they enforce the Arbitral Award. We should join these patrols because they are in our favor. People say there is no enforcement mechanism. There is. The US and its allies go there, they sail and they tell China, you cannot throw us out here because this is part of the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines under the Orbital Award, and we can conduct naval drills here. If we do it ourselves, we are no match. China is the largest navy in the world, the largest Coast Guard fleet in the world. We cannot really match China. So we have to rely on like-minded states. And that is really the game plan. We got the award so that the world can rally behind that orbital award. And the more orbital awards we have, the more countries will rally behind the orbital awards. And that will bury further the China's 10-dash line. So we should invite the rest of the world to sail in the West Philippine Sea and join them also. If we don't do that, then we will be thrown out. If today the US will say we will not show up in the South China Sea anymore, if the US and its allies will say that, tomorrow the 10-dash line becomes the national boundary of China. We cannot stop China. So our game plan must be to invite the rest of the world to sail in the West Philippine Sea, conduct freedom of navigation and operation, because with that, the 10-dash line will be buried, will never be realized by China. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we have one question from our online participant. Sir Kevin Santos, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good morning. Good morning po, sir. Sir, it's an honor po, and thank you for defending our sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. My question is this is a long one, but I think many of us, or even perhaps including you, that are puzzled or frustrated that the Philippine government did not accept the offer of the Americans to provide a military escort in support of the naval and coastal patrols in the West Philippine Sea, notably in the Escalda Shoal. Do you think that the reason that the Marcos administration is that they wanted to show the world that they were conducting their own free will to patrol our waters, or perhaps they were mindful of the upcoming U.S. elections and didn't want to influence the results of it, especially if Trump would win the elections, or perhaps they are just pursuing a naive nationalistic policy? Thank you po.
Well, General Browner said that the chief of staff, he said that we'll do that at the last instance when our Navy or coastal personnel are dying already. So he has not actually uh, 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 he has not actually rejected it. He said we'll do that in extremis as a last resort, but it takes time to convince them. Just like when we filed the Orbital Award, it took some time to convince our government, to convince them to file another Orbital Award. So I think they will turn around eventually, because China has the largest navy in the world, the largest submarine fleet in the world, the largest Coast Guard fleet in the world, the largest standing army in the world, the second largest economy in the world. We are really no match. If we pursue this policy of not accepting as help, assistance from our treaty allies or like-minded friends, we will lose. But I'm looking at it in a longer perspective. It takes time for some people to realize that we really have no other choice. Maybe they want to explore other avenues, but at the end of the day, we just need to have the world to support us, because China is the hegemon. It's a nuclear armed state, and it does not respect international law. And we cannot enforce international law by ourselves. We need the community of nations to help us enforce international law, because international law is not perfect. Okay, there's a decision, and the convention states, UNCLOS states, that those who ratify the UNCLOS must comply with the Orbital Award. But what do you do with a state that does not comply with the Orbital Award? You have 5 countries, nuclear armed states, that lost in arbitration under UNCLOS or under international law, under ICJ. The U.S. lost to Nicaragua in the arbitration, but the U.S. said we will not abide the ICJ has no jurisdiction. But eventually, it agreed to give economic aid in lieu of damages, and Nicaragua accepted it. So that's really a settlement. There was a peaceful settlement, and India lost to Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal arbitration. India is a nuclear armed state, and India said that we will comply right away. Russia lost to the Netherlands in the Arctic Sunrise case. Russia is a nuclear armed state. Russia said we will not comply. We don't recognize the arbitral tribunal. But eventually they complied. They said, okay, we will pay the damages, but we'll negotiate with the Netherlands, and they agreed on a smaller amount. That's compliance. And in the Mauritius case, UK lost to Mauritius, and UK said we will comply. We will honor the. So there is only one state that has not complied. China. China is a rogue state. It's an outlier, but it doesn't represent the general practice. Most of the countries, all of them except China, complied with decisions of arbitral tribunal eventually. So maybe China will give up eventually, will accept. But we must not give up ourselves. We must continue. We must get the support of the world, because China needs the world to survive. It has to export, import. It cannot survive without importing and exporting. And they need the world. So it takes time only. So we must be patient. We must not give up. We must continuously strengthen the award by more arbitral awards. We must ask our like-minded states to conduct freedom of navigation operations in the West Philippine Sea. So this is a long game. If China sees this as a 100-year marathon, we should look at it as a 1,000-year marathon, an intergenerational struggle for us. We should not expect China to roll over today or even tomorrow. This will take time, but we should not give up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we have one more participant, Sir Ricardo Lopez. Sir, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, how are you? Good evening. More than a question is just to thank you all for the invitation, to thank the Embassy of the Philippines in Mexico, to congratulate Justice Carpio for the very interesting conference. Thank you for sharing all this vital information and for bringing this important subject to our attention and to underline all these vital details of international politics. And thank you again for inviting us, and many congratulations for the great conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Ricardo, for your comments, sir. We appreciate that. Sir, we have several questions in the chat box. I'll read them out to you, sir.
Yes.
One of them is, good morning, Justice Carpio. First and foremost, it's an honor to have a forum with you po. Maraming salamat po sa pagmamahal sa bayan. His question is, how can the Filipino youth contribute to this issue? Do you have any specific guides po?
Well, we are fighting a nuclear armed state, 1.4 billion people, largest standing army in the world, largest naval fleet, Coast Guard vessel. So how do we fight a Goliath? First of all, we must be united. We must be on the same page. We must have a common narrative. Right now, we have diverse narratives, conflicting narratives. We have some of our legal luminaries saying that the Spratlys and the Scarborough Shoal are outside Philippine territory. We have to have a common narrative, which is ironclad, which is in accordance with international law. And we must explain this to our people. We must be on the same common page. That's one. You must be united. We must have a common narrative. We still don't have that. So that's hopefully we can have that soon. That's one. That's essential. We just have to be united. Second, we cannot defeat China on our own. we have to ally ourselves with like-minded states. We're lucky we have a nuclear-armed ally. We have to expand our friends. And I think we have already, because we have the Arbitral Award, those states that follow the rule of law have sided with us now. You have the EU, Canada, Australia, South Korea, Japan, India. So they are with us, but we have to explain further that the Arbitral Award protects not only the Philippines, but all other coastal states that don't have the naval power to protect their maritime zones. That the Arbitral Award will protect a coastal state from a bigger neighbor that covets its maritime zone. Because if the Arbitral Award cannot be enforced, then no other Arbitral Award can be enforced. It will mean the collapse of UNCLOS. If China can claim the entire South China Sea as its own lake, despite international law, despite UNCLOS, then UNCLOS will collapse. And if UNCLOS collapses, how do you protect your maritime zones? There's no law that will protect you anymore. You'll just have to acquire warships, warplanes, missiles, and money for social services, for education will have to be diverted. And it will be a terrible world when might is right. When to defend your own maritime zones, you have to use weapons immediately because there's no other legal remedy. So we have to preserve really UNCLOS and explain, especially to small coastal states, because they will, if we lose here, they will surely follow, they will lose their maritime zones against their bigger neighbors if there is no more UNCLOS. So we have, first, we must be on the same page, the entire nation. Second, we convinced more states to join us, to support us by explaining to them. And eventually, China will be isolated. There will be no, right now, China is slowly being isolated. We have to push this further. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have several questions, sir, in the chat box. One is from Sir Dion Abella. If the Chinese did not make comment during the arbitration, what is the historical basis that China uses to claim our outlying islands? Do they hold any weight?
Well, the basis of China is still the 9-dash line, which they have now called the 10-dash line. They have said that in their media, because China did not participate except filing that position paper. But they also, in that position paper, they also said 9-dash line. So they're still claiming the 9-dash line. And there's something very curious, because very few people know that, of course, we all know that the Kuomintang under the nationalists invented the 9-dash line. The Kuomintang now is in Taiwan, and at that time, during the arbitration, the president was President Ma of the Kuomintang party, and Taiwan intervened through its International Law Society, intervened in the arbitration, and Taiwan said Ituaba is habitable based on international law, based on UNCLOS. Taiwan, in their intervention, never mentioned the 9-dash line. Taiwan argued solely based on UNCLOS and international, never mentioned historic rights, never mentioned the 9-dash line. The 9-dash line does not appear in their pleading. So there is now a division, conflict between the Taiwanese interpretation of the 9-dash line and the mainland Chinese interpretation of the 9-dash line. So we must explain to the world that 9-dash line has no basis really. Even those who invented the 9-dash line is not following China, mainland China. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have one question from Sir John Oracion, sir. He was curious, during the signing of the Treaty of Washington, why didn't the United States update the original treaty lines and generate a newer or updated version of the map if they wanted to include the Spratly Islands in the Scarborough Shoals?
Well, the treaty lines were there in the treaty, so you don't you cannot change that because that's the document was already signed. You have to look at the Treaty of Washington and look at the text. Any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines, very specific. Any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines are also ceded. So what are these islands lying outside the lines? Where is the document? Well, the US said in the Islas Palmas case, this is the map of the Philippines under under American rule and under Spanish rule. So that is where you find the islands of the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. The map itself is called Carta General del Archipelago Filipino, Philippine Archipelago. So if you are looking for what are the islands of the Philippine archipelago, go to this map, which was the official map during the Spanish regime and the official map during the American regime.
Thank you, sir. And sir, we have another question from our colleagues from the Philippine Consulate General in Hong Kong. Sir, may I ask if the rise in sea levels would someday alter the baselines and maritime zones of coastal states, do you think our current baseline would remain the same?
Well, the baselines can change based on natural factors. In fact, whole states may disappear based on natural factors. Sea level rise could submerge some of the island Pacific countries. And they would disappear. And there would be no more maritime zones because everything is underwater, provided it's caused by by nature, not by man. Any man-made island does not generate any maritime zone under UNCLOS. So definitely if there will be sea level rise, our baselines could change. And this is what's important. If we hold on to our claim to the Spratlys, my projection is that sea level rise will submerge all the islands in the Spratlys. By the end of the century, sea level rise is estimated at 1 to 2 meters. And beyond that, it will even go higher, the sea level rise. So by end of the century, most of the islands in the Spratlys will be submerged. Once submerged, they will form part of our exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles. I've said this many times. So nature will help us win this battle because sea level rise will submerge these islands. Even Scarborough Shoal will be submerged because it's only 1 or 2 meters above sea level at high tide, at low tide. So of course, it will be very destructive. A sea level rise will submerge many of our islands also, will eat up many of our coastlines, but it will submerge, it will also submerge island Pacific countries, but it will also submerge the Spratlys. And that will now mean that the Spratlys will form part of our exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we have some questions in the chat box that are very similar. I think one of them is like the Philippines being part of Southeast Asia. What is your opinion, sir, on the stance of other Southeast Asian countries in terms of the arbitration and our issues with China?
Well, Indonesia has invoked the arbitral award in defending their maritime zones, their EEZ in the Natunas. They said we're changing the name of Natunas to North Natuna Sea. Their EEZ there because there's the 9-dash line has been invalidated. Vietnam has been invoking it in conferences. Malaysia has not invoked it, but has said that the 9-dash line is ridiculous. It has no basis in international law without mentioning the arbitral award. So all these countries really benefit from what we did. And not only all these countries, because the definition of an island that's habitable is there, and that means many countries claim 200 nautical mile EEZ for their tiny islands that are not habitable. The US claims that their islands in the Pacific, uninhabited islands, uninhabitable, generate 200 nautical mile EEZ. Based on that decision, it's only entitled to a territorial sea of 12 nautical miles. So what is the effect? Waters beyond 12 nautical miles forms part of the high seas, and anybody can fish there now. So China actually gained more fishing ground because of that ruling. The exclusive economic zones of the world shrunk because islands that are not habitable have been denied now exclusive economic zones under that ruling. So China, which is the largest fishing fleet in the world, can fish in more areas, actually. That's the net effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we have time for one last question from the chat box. In your opinion, sir, what do you think are the potential risks and benefits of pursuing a more diplomatic and independent or diplomatic approach in dealing with global powers in this contested region?
Well, first of all, we have to accept that there's a wide disparity between our force military and the Chinese military. Even Japan, South Korea, Poland, Germany, the European countries that are members of NATO, they want US troops, and they pay for these US troops for the upkeep because they know that in case of invasion, these troops will become tripwires that will commit immediately the US to defend them, because under the US Constitution, only Congress can declare war. And they don't want to wait for Congress to deliberate. And that's why they're willing to pay for the upkeep of these US troops as a tripwire. And we have thrown out the Americans. What's the next best thing? EDCA. Because under EDCA, the concept is the Americans will leave their military hardware here, their HIMARS, in military bases, in our military bases, so that if there's a crisis, there's an invasion, their arms are here already, they will just send their troops. But it also means that because it will be an emergency, if there's an invasion, we can break open these warehouses and use the HIMARS ourselves. And this is really the message to China. With those HIMARS in place here, the Typhoon in place here in our warehouse, we actually have this for ourselves. Because, of course, you don't have to wait for the Americans from Guam to come here if the invasion is happening already. And the Americans know that. So that is really the message, that we have the capability to defend ourselves. Without these weapons, we don't have the capability. That is really the message. So we have to understand this, that you do not ask the Germans, the Polish, do they have an independent foreign policy because they have American troops there? No, that's not the question. You have to look at your adversary. Is there anybody who covets your land or sea, your maritime zones or your land territory? We have only one country has designs to invade our maritime zones and island territories. That's China. So we can use the argument that all these countries which produce warplanes, warships, missiles, they still need the US troops in their soil. Now we are saying we don't need US troops, we just need your arms here. That's EDCA. And we should accept that as the most practical means of defending ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Maraming salamat po. At this point, I would like to request all participants to please indulge us and to please turn on your cameras for a group photo for this webinar. Okay. I'll count to 3 and take several screenshots. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, sorry, one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much, po. Thank you, everyone. Again, I'd like to remind all participants to please accomplish the evaluation form, the link to which has been posted in the chat box. The evaluation form will be the basis for the issuance of the certificates of participation. So thank you very much to all our participants and to, of course, Chief Justice. I'd like to call on now Ms. Marissa Winkler, Third Secretary and Vice Consul of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico. Ma'am?
Thank you, MJ. On behalf of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, I would like to express my gratitude to Justice Antonio Carpio for the very informative presentation. I believe all of us are enlightened with how to define the Philippine territory through the 3 treaties, the Treaty of Paris, the 1900 Treaty of Washington, and the 1930 treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom, and our maritime rights under UNCLOS and the Arbitral Award 2016, which invalidates the line claim of China. So that's very important for us to know. So to our participants, I hope that the knowledge that you learn today, you will share it to your friends, family, and colleagues, because that is our tool to tell the world that to defend the Philippines. So thank you very much, and we look forward to have you in our future events. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you po. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.